Good evening. My name is Oliver Thomas. I'm the host of the Good Morning Show on WBOK with Equity Media in partnership with Historic Xavier University every morning, 5 days a week, from 7 to 10 a.m. Filming on WBOK, streaming 1230.com and on Facebook Live at WBOK, as well as 12:30 a.m. On your AM dial. Thank y'all for joining me today with what I think is probably one of the most important relevant discussions that's not only happening around our country, but happening right here in New Orleans. And this Inspired NOLA virtual panel discussion is entitled ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and the role that it's playing to our panelists in juvenile delinquency, as well as much of the behavior that folks seem not to be able to understand. I'm extremely excited to be leading this discussion. And for those who may not be familiar with the title ACEs, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention describes ACEs as traumatic events that occur in the life of a child from 0 to 17 years old, such as violence, abuse, neglect in the home or community. Dr. shows all those kind of things that kind of happen to kids that many folk don't see, but they're. The purpose of this panel is to not only discuss various outside factors that play a role in adolescent behavior and brain development, but what are the services, Rhonda? What are the organizations that are available in New Orleans to curb the effects of these factors? But before we get into this discussion with this great panel, and before I announce this great panel, we're going to have a welcome from Inspired NOLA's Executive Director of Exceptional Student Services, Miss Diana Lewis. Miss Diane Lewis.
Thank you, Ms. Oliver. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's event. Hope that you are doing well amidst an ever-changing environment. My name is Diane Lewis. I am the Executive Director of Exceptional Student Services for Inspired NOLA Charter Schools. At Inspired NOLA, we believe in equity and inclusion for all scholars, and I am so privileged to open up tonight's panel with accomplished individuals to discuss ACEs. Adverse childhood experiences impact not only the child's identity, but how they learn. It is our duty to support and uplift our scholars through our community and education, so they can reach their full potential. On behalf of Inspired NOLA, we thank all of the panelists and audience members for being here tonight, and we engage in a much needed conversation. Thank you all and welcome once again.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis, and thank you, the Inspired NOLA team and family for putting this panel to this important discussion. Before we begin our discussion, I want to introduce our esteemed panel. We have Shaq Koss, Shaq Koss. He is the activities coordinator for one of the leading nonprofits or mentoring organizations in the community, Son of a Saint. Rhonda Jackson, no stranger to public service. And in all of my years being involved in this community, Rhonda has been there giving back. She's the director of No Kids Hungry. And of course, one of the contributors of Equity Media and WBOK, one of the leading behavior specialists in our community, especially in dealing with kids, Dr. Maurice Scholas. He's the principal for Scholas Medical Consulting. And a lady who I did not know, but when I was talked about the panel today, many of the folk I respect in the mental health field said, oh, wow, you're going to have Dr. Loretta Saunier as part of the panel. And she's the assistant professor of psychiatry at Tulane University. Of course, one of our leading administrators and educators, Mr. Virgil Tiller. He's the middle school academy principal for Dwight D. Eisenhower Charter School, and the great and wonderful Dr. Charnel Ware. She's a social worker at McDonough 35 High School. I want to thank all of our panelists, guys, and let me say this. We can kind of be respectful of time, but don't want this to be one of those boring Zoom panels. You know, there's a lot to say about this. Jump in, be respectful, jump out. But there are a lot of people that are listening that I told, especially when I told the caliber of people we're having it, we want to know how you feel about this. But for our panelists, and I'll start with you, Dr. Saunier, and then Dr. Saunier and Dr. Scholas, and then you guys can kind of pick up after that. What influenced you guys' decision to join this juvenile justice, especially this mentorship field? And what is it about child behavior and psychology that attracted you to that? Dr. Sonia.
That's a big question. I went into medical school to be a psychiatrist. And so I've always just been interested in how people work. What got me interested in juvenile justice, I got training in forensic psychiatry and just how people get treated in different systems and the impact of different systems on the people that are stuck in them. And so that's really just my area of specialty. And so what my area of specialty is in juvenile justice relates in that way is, where the mental health and development and law intersect.
Dr. Schultz.
Thank you so much. First of all, thanks, Inspired NOLA, for having me as a part of this panel. It's so exciting to be here with so many people coming at the issue from so many different facets. I'm a practicing physician. I do pediatric rehab, meaning I care for kids with acquired or congenital physical disabilities. And by definition, their parents and all their loved ones are traumatized. So I spend all of my days professionally managing people that have trauma you can see and some trauma that they don't express well. Aside from that, I'm a Black man in America. And as a Black man in America going through the public educational system, it is a miracle and grace that I wasn't put on a bunch of medications, shunted somewhere I didn't belong, and end up being disciplined in a way that I shouldn't have been disciplined. So I come from a perspective where there was already one Black person in a gifted and talented program. So when I took the test, they lost my test scores twice because they couldn't have two in there at the same time. So I come to this as a professional, but also as a person that's walked that path. And I might have been the first in some rooms, but I'm determined to never be the last. So this disruption of the school to prison pipeline is a disruption of what could have been a reality for me that I'm proud to say did materialize. Thank you.
Virgil Tiller, Principal Tiller.
Yes. For me, it's a personal experience like Dr. Schultz just said. I've been denied earlier on, and that caused me some, if I didn't have the support system that I had earlier on, growing up in New Orleans, coming from the lower Ninth Ward, and we know that area traditionally does not produce. I know you're a proud member of that. I know that area, usually when we speak of that area, it's spoken of as something that's very negative. So my mother was able to raise two doctors, and I'm the last one that doesn't really make that money because I'm in education. So she raised two doctors and in that area. And the most important thing for me was access to other things that were normal in my everyday life. So I was given the access, and sometimes access and information is taken away from kids, and that produces a traumatic experience for them because they know nothing else. They don't know anything else but what they see on the regular. So for me, bringing in outside entities like the Silverback Society and the 100 National Coalition of 100 Black Women into schools to help our students inside the educational system maintain and get a broader view of life, broader view of life has been my goal in education for the past 20 years. And that drives me. And that's the reason why I love being on this panel right now.
Thank you. Dr. Chanel Ware.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for having me on the panel. What influenced me to become a school social worker and in the field of psychology is to help promote individual lifestyle changes and assist our adolescents, that's who I primarily work with restructuring their thought process in areas of decision-making, how to control stress management, and change behaviors based on their understanding by first trying to help them adapt to the underlying causes of their problems to help better predict their future endeavors. Other things that influenced me to join the juvenile justice system, I'm a big component of mentoring. I'm an active participant with Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and the Pontchartrain chapter of the Links, where I have advocated for Pontchartrain chapter of the Links to come into McDonald 35. And we do very much intense mentoring with at-risk students. We followed them at the time, it was from 7th grade and now through college that we have students there. So this is very near and dear to my heart that my adolescents need consistent mentoring. Thank you.
Thank you. Rhonda Jackson.
Hi, good evening. The thing is, I don't remember ever not being in this line of work or in this field or caring about kids, right? I've always, ever since I was even a child. What got me into social work and social work administration, though, was seeing that it is actually a systems approach that's often needed, seeing that money needs to get into the right hands at the right time. And so in a lot of my work, I've provided grants and funding to make sure that kids actually receive those services. My current job, and I've been doing this now for 10 years, is No Kid Hungry director. If you look at the ACEs questionnaire, one of the questions is, have you ever faced hunger? And so a lot of times when we talk about trauma, we think of some of the big things, but also we need to make sure that we talk about some of the smaller things or some of the things that can go unnoticed, such as childhood hunger. Before COVID, it was 1 in 4 children faced childhood hunger. Now, post-COVID, it's 1 in 3. And so as we talk about trauma and get more into what's happening with kids, I think that we need to, 1, have this community perspective from it, and 2, make sure that we uplift those organizations and those entities and those school systems that are actually doing the work and creating those trauma-informed spaces, which is one of the things I've been able to observe throughout the years.
And our next is, I can just use one name, Shaq.
Yep, that's perfect. Yeah, I wanted to thank you guys for having me on the panel as well. I think to kind of echo some of the sentiments of some of the other panelists, I just kind of wanted to be a disruptor, and that's why I wanted to get into this space. As Son of a Saint, we have a very specific focus on fatherless boys. And I think that I wanted to be a part of such a specific work because, when you look at the percentages of young men, of Black men in the criminal justice system who grew up without a father in the home, the percentage, the number is staggering. And I wanted to continue to work on the front end to kind of prevent some of that. So I'm very grateful to be in the space that I'm in. I'm not foreign to the struggle to the fight that we're fighting against. It is very personal to me. So yeah, I'm very privileged to have dodged some of the same struggles that my peers have faced, and I'm also paying it forward. So yeah, that's a huge reason why I'm in this work, and it's been super fulfilling to me so far.
Dr. Sonia and Dr. Scholas, set the table for us as clinical, as professionals, in this field. Brain development in adolescence. Our parents ask that questions. Our public officials ask that questions. And I don't know that we've ever gotten answers, but how would you describe the development stage or lack of development in 12 to 18-year-olds? Start this time with Dr. Scholas.
I'm going to let my colleague, Dr. Sonia, really go through the biology of it, but I want to break it down from a real standpoint. When you're going from childhood to adulthood, your whole struggle is figuring out who your people are. Mm-hmm. And you already were born into a family full of people, and you're trying to establish a peer group that's your people. And that process requires some trial and error. It requires some boundary testing. And that's the part that makes teenagers so exhausting and so lovable at the same time. And we understand how that works when it works well. When you have a peer group that's functional, when you develop a friend group that's going places. But we also see what happens when people are trying to step away from their family group, be it intact or not, and move into a peer group that's not functional, that's not going places. And so what we're looking to do when kids are naturally exploring the transition from the home bubble to the world bubble is figure out how to make that positive, how to make that supportive, and how to recognize when they're just being willful teenagers versus when they're expressing things with their body and with their actions that they can't say with their words. And I really think that's the root of making trauma-informed spaces and trauma-informed places and spaces. Dr. Sonia.
Dr. Sonia.
Yes, thank you. And so, yes, if I've been tasked with talking about the biology of adolescent brain development, really I think of it as that there's 4 basic changes that happen between the age of 12 and 18. I mean, actually the processes start earlier, but the peak is during adolescence. So one is that you have this thing called synaptic pruning. And so your brain volume and your gray matter, which is kind of where different types, or the way I think about it, different types of information get stored. So that gets pruned. And so your brain goes through and selects what it's going to use and what it's not going to use. So that's number one. Number two is the one that people probably talk about the most, which is this process called myelination, which is when the connectivity in the brain gets a lot better, especially in the prefrontal cortex. And that's the part of the brain that controls your impulse control. And so that whole process is going on actually until age 29, but it starts to get stronger in adolescence. The next one is that your dopamine system is which is the reward system, is the most active it's ever going to be in your life. So you are really primed to experience good things and reward. And coupled with that is that you have extreme sensitivity to reward that comes from your peers. So their brains act differently. And when we do imaging studies, it looks differently when you have kids with peers and kids without. And then the last one is just your emotive system and your impulse control system. They start to work better together. Your emotive system is mature before your impulse control system. So just the emotions that you see in adolescence, that's why they don't have the impulses, the impulse control to set things, emotions under control.
And continue with you and Dr. Scholes before setting the table for our other experts. Negative and positive behavior, especially as it relates to those outside factors. In which ways, Dr. Sonia and Dr. Scholes, do we see those things playing out in that age group?
So I think Dr. Sonia's point is really great in that your brain is figuring out what cells need to talk to what other cells.
Mm-hmm.
Your brain is figuring out how to control what makes it mad and how to reinforce what makes it happy. Okay. And so that makes for a very volatile mix. So a lot of things that are volatile, what do you do in life? You put around stuff that's inert or stuff that shields it and makes it a little less unstable. That's what we're talking about when we're talking through these processes and things and making trauma-informed spaces. Children need to be heard. Children need to be understood. And their explosions or their volatility recognized as a normal part of development rather than a problem that needs them to be disciplined. I think part of this discussion we want to have is for the kids to say, we hear you, but also for our parents and our father and mother figures to say, this is what this is. They're not just doing this to get on your nerves. And I think Dr. Sonia did a brilliant job of setting the table to say, this is what's happening biologically. And I'm trying to say, this is what that looks like clinically or physically when you're working with them.
I think you guys have set the table. I like this Sonia Scholes team, SNS, that's working. Then let's segue to our other panelists. Dr. Scholes said volatile mix, Principal Tiller, Dr. Ware, Rhonda Jackson, and Shaq Cost, but especially for Shaq, Ware, and Tiller, you guys see this, Principal Tiller, you see this volatile mix play out every day, especially as it relates to ACEs and how it's working within our kids, correct?
Yes, I do. So reading educational brain research, and to doctors can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I did read, and I read that adolescents, they take in they remember the very, very great things that happen in their life. And they also remember the very, very bad things. So to use my life as an example, I never heard my parents argue. I knew they argued, but I never saw it happen in action. And I think that affected me as how I raise my children and how I deal with my wife right now. Also, I remember the very, very bad things that happened to me. And I started off the panel by talking about those things, being slighted, being put on the side. So some of those things, when I receive kids in the morning, I have to take a pulse check of just their faces when they get off the bus. So if I see them, I'm like, oh, Johnny doesn't look right. Come on, Johnny, let me talk to you on the side first. And I can have that, preemptive strike with him before he even gets into the schoolhouse. Some things kids want you to help them. it's a little bit different now. When we were in school, we didn't have a lot of access to outside entities or people that could help us in school. I remember going to school, and if I had a problem, I had to deal with it. And that basically was it. Now they have access. And as an adult, I have a hard time seeking.
You're
help
greeting
from
them.
others.
You're greeting them as they get off the bus. As you look into those eyes, can you put a number on it? Dr. Ware, can you put a number on it, check with the kids you mentor? So is there a percentage or a number where wow, adverse childhood experiences, they're playing a part in this population?
Mr. Thomas, if I may, unfortunately, I can't pinpoint a number on it.
Okay.
Our kids are traumatized. We're dealing with adolescents who were born during the time of Katrina, who experienced a lot of transition as far as moving with homes, changing schools, just a whole lot of dynamics. So when I bring it all together, I bring it back to Bronfman Brenner's theory of the socio-ecological theory, where we have the child that's in the center, and then it branches out into different nucleus, meaning the school is the micro level, the meso system, we're dealing with community levels, we're dealing with culture, you're dealing with a whole lot of different dynamics. So as far as pinpointing one particular kid, some you can identify that may be needing more attention when they get off the bus than others, but the referrals that I receive, all of them have experienced some sort of trauma, whether if it's through divorce, separation from a parent, parent being incarcerated, hunger, as Ms. Jackson mentioned. There's a lot of dynamics that some children witness violence in the home. So there are all kind of different dynamics that kids are referred to me. And the underlying reason that they refer to me for one thing, a whole can of worm open up for other things. So I can't pinpoint a percentage because all of my babies need that wraparound support.
Shaq, as someone who does that mentoring, can you give us a number when you sit down with those kids, you look in their eyes? How many do you know experience this type of adverse childhood experience?
Yeah, I have to agree with Dr. Ware in the sense that, we're now at a place where we serve 200 boys, and it really is hard to pinpoint. So what we try to do is just do a lot of proactive work on speaking to things like just loss. A lot of things that I do in my role is like competitive sports, things like that. And a lot of times, because of the trauma that they face, boys can take something like losing a game, and it can be like the most drastic loss that they've ever faced. Like they just internalize it in a way that you would never imagine. It seems small, but the way that they react, the way that they may blow up is humongous because of another loss that they face, and just the way that they process losing. So it's like a lot of talking to them about loss, about trash talk, something small like trash talk. They can internalize trash talk with a peer as kind of verbal abuse in another relationship that they may have had. So it's just like talking to them about the way that they compete with each other, the way that they trash talk, just setting boundaries in that way, and the way they process loss. So that's a lot of things that I'm doing in my role, and that's across the board. It's worth just talking to the whole group about it, because you just never know how they'll react to that.
Good point, guys. When you have some intellectual heavyweights, you get words like myelination and social ecological theory and volatile mixes. So you wordsmiths and intellectuals out there, make sure you're paying attention. Rhonda, Dr. Scholas, and Dr. Sonye, the role of family and community. Dr. Scholas, on the show, everybody wants to hold parents or somebody accountable. Adverse child experiences, somebody's got to pay for what these children do. Family and community, the role they play. Dr. Sonia.
The role that family and community play is really the most important. We know that it just takes having one consistent, trustworthy relationship, that there's an adult and you can depend on them. That's what you need to be a successful adult. And so really it's the most important thing.
Dr. Scholas.
I'm going to yield to my colleague, Rhonda Jackson,
Absolutely.
first, because she is a native New Orleanian and has been in the community and the schools at the same time. So she has a really great perspective on this.
Rhonda, no kid hungry.
So, it's a couple of things. One is, Ms. Sonia said, one of the things is having that one parent, that one person. It doesn't even have to be a parent who can say, nah, you don't really want to do that. What we know and recognize is that a lot of our kids, and you asked about numbers earlier, like I said, with hunger, it's 1 in 3. That's not even talking about, who got shot last night, who had a fight, all of those other ACEs. When I took the ACEs test myself, I had 4, but I also had very strong family members, a grandmother who was my world, who actually uplifted me. I also had community organizations and things I participated in. And so having those things, whether that is, we've got to meet our kids where they are. One of the things I'm also excited about is my work with Empower NOLA that Dr. Scholas brought us on to, where we're looking at creating trauma-informed spaces in second line organizations, right? And so that when they're working with those kids and you're beating and you're doing those things and you're just with kids, what you're finding out is that, like you said, somebody stepping on my shoe might just be nothing today, but if you step on my shoe tomorrow and I'm mad about something that happened to me last night, then it's a fight, right? And so having those adults ready and at the ready and well-informed about how to transition those kids, how to work with those kids, and how to find the right resources. Because that's the other thing too. A lot of times we have the resources and aren't aware of them, or we have the systems and our parents don't really know how to navigate them, right? Because it's a whole lot, and it's more than just picking up the phone and calling. Sometimes it's talking to the right person. Sometimes that person may talk to you in the wrong way, and now the adult's not ready either, right? And so we've not only got kids with trauma, we've got adults with trauma that hadn't been dealt with. And so having them in those systems is also something.
Dr. Scholas, no matter what Dr. Ware does, no matter what Shaq does, or Principal Tiller does, even if they stabilize them that day, they go back to that community and they go back home. Maurice Scholas.
Yep. And I think one of the things that I think is really, really important here is that each of us is talking about the elephant from a different way. Some of us are describing the leg, some of us are describing the trunk, some of us are describing the ear, some of us are describing the tail, but we're all talking about the elephant. And so what I think is important is when we're working with Empower NOLA, we can take experts like Dr. Ware, who literally understands the theory behind it, understands New Orleans behind it, and understands exactly what to do when there's a problem, and partner her with a Mardi Gras Indian chief that is around kids all the time, understands it and has access to and has gravitas in the community in a way that even the mayor doesn't have, and put those two people together and imagine what that partnership can do. There's nothing deficient in someone like Dr. Ware or Mr. Tiller. There's nothing deficient in our community leaders and liaisons, but those two things together where each side understands the language of the other one makes the potential for our kids to not just have a place in a space, but a place in a space that works for them. And if the place and space doesn't work, everybody knows what to do next. And I think that's the part that's exciting, knowing what to do next, because we all know about ACEs and trauma, even if we don't know it academically, we kind of know it personally, but we also don't always know what to do to make our systems less toxic to our kids, to make our systems less judgmental to our kids.
Absolutely. We're going to start this next piece with Dr. Ware. In part of that group, Dr. Ware, some not only may experience ACEs, they have those outside of familiar influences, but many of those kids, Dr. Ware and Shaq and Principal Tiller, are victims of the system, specifically the juvenile criminal justice system. How do you deal with that group in terms of their experiences to ACE?
As much as I would like to say that we should work collaboratively, and I think that's important and essential, oftentimes as a clinician, sometimes I run into roadblocks with trying to get the necessary help for some of my students. A kid that come to me that's traumatized, I just want to piggyback when we talk about family dynamics. One of the things I do as a clinician is to help improve communication, develop healthy boundaries, and define everybody's role in the family. So if I have to do an assessment and refer that family out or that child out, remember, I always say we go back to the child. That's a primary person, but we have to work with everybody in the household. If they don't have insurance, I run into a roadblock. If the kid needs to be placed on medication for anxiety, depression, suicide, or anything, I'm running into a roadblock. So we do need to work collaboratively better with systems so that we can prevent a kid from being incarcerated in that manner.
Shaq, when you look into that kid you're mentoring, a lot of times you're not only mentoring kids from the environment they're from some of these juvenile institutions. How do you deal with that? And especially that outside of that related to trauma that comes even with mentoring, let alone education. Shaq.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges that I've run into when dealing with a kid that's coming out of a system like that is getting them caught up in where the world is. I think that the world already moves super fast. I think that at some time, in some spaces, it moves even faster for like a teenager. In the way that their trends change, in the way that the way that they dress change, the technology, the video games you're playing, the music you're listening to, and a huge like obstacle to help them get over is feeling like they're super behind the times and feeling like they're not with the in crowd because they've been in this facility for the last X amount of months or sometimes even longer than that, and that's a huge challenge with them with their self-esteem, their self-worth, and all of those things. So then especially for Black kids, like feeling like this is the most important thing to them is like being hip and being like, dressing fly and all of those things and feeling like they're up on the latest slang and everything like that. And that could really affect them mentally, and feeling like they're not equipped to go out into the world. So I think one of the biggest things for me is always helping them just get up to speed, just helping them get just making a seamless transition back into the world. So that's usually like step one for me as like an individual mentor. Yeah, that's a huge challenge though.
Principal Tiller, you're greeting them as they get off the bus, but some of those kids, before they got off the bus, they just walked out the juvenile detention center. That's
Yes.
a whole nother level of attention.
Yes.
How do you deal with it?
So the first thing I always tell people on my team is just to listen to those kids first. They just want to be heard. In my experience, kids that come out of the juvenile justice system, their negative behavior is enhanced because I spoke before about access. When they go into that system, they have more access to negative things that they had before. And when they come out, they have a new sense of what life is based on their experience. My job is to hear them, meet them where they are, and to provide them a different set of experiences to show them that things are different and that it can be different for them. So it is difficult getting those kids, but I can't judge them as well. I have to see myself inside that child. I have to believe and say, I have to see that child as being my child. And so when I approach it like that, it's a situation where I don't give up. I'm going to be firm. I'm going to be just. I'm going to hold you accountable, and I'm going to try to make the scholar understand their decisions, where they were wrong, where they were right. Because sometimes their response to a situation is incorrect, but they may be right in the process of something may have wronged them, but how they responded to it is completely wrong. So it starts to be that they're never going to be heard because they don't know how to communicate properly with individuals in their community.
Rhonda Jackson, Dr. Sonia and Dr. Scholas, it's crazy. We're talking about rehabilitating children, especially those children who come through the juvenile justice system. How do you rehabilitate children, especially when they've been stigmatized as needing to be rehabilitated? Start with you, Rhonda.
So one, we've got to believe that it's possible, right? We've got a lot of people nowadays, especially in this community, I hear are ready to throw away our kids. And then what, right? So I think we've got to, one, believe that it's possible, and that rehabilitation and getting the kids on the right track is possible. We've got to give them those resources. And by those resources, I mean, that's where the adults in the community step in, right? Because if the adults are not prepared to deal with those responses and just go on our justice system, our criminal justice system, our discipline system for school is all about fear. But what happened to love? What happened to understanding? What happened to actually meeting those kids where they are, honoring what gifts they're coming into it, the situation with, right? Because that is happening. Those kids are not just empty slates. They have gifts, they have talents, they have strengths that we need to recognize and use that as part of the rehabilitation process and as part of getting them on track to where they need to go.
Dr. Sonia, some kids just can't be rehabilitated, right? They took my property, they hurt somebody in my family. If there's no parental and guidance, and Dr. So that's not me. That's what we hear, people who call in the show. Surely somebody's got to pay the price, especially if the kid can't be rehabilitated, right?
I mean, it's extremely rare to find a kid that I would think they couldn't be rehabilitated. And it's always important, when you see a behavior, instead of saying, what's wrong with this kid? What happened to this kid? And, in the juvenile justice system, for me, what's most important, before rehabilitation is that I want to reduce the amount of harm that I do to kids. Because if I don't listen closely, or if I say, oh, you're having trouble sleeping, and I don't, try to understand that it makes total sense that they can't sleep if they don't feel safe. I could be giving them medications they don't need, and then other medications if they have behavior, when I need to stand back and understand what happened. So,
Dr. Scholes, Dr. Sonia just said, reduce the amount of harm.
Yes.
When that kid just went to the juvenile system because they did some harm. What do we tell society about rehabilitation?
So I think this process requires something beyond sympathy. It requires empathy. And I'm going to tell what the difference is. Sympathy is when you understand something you personally experienced. Empathy is your ability to understand something that's outside of your personal experience. That's the first step everybody has to do here when you ask what happened rather than what's wrong or what did you do. The second thing is that you have to be willing to be vulnerable. All of us on this panel are seen by our kids as perfect. Everybody looks at these people on this panel like, well, you all never understand what this is like because y'all never had anything go wrong in your whole life. Dr. Scholes, you're a doctor. You went to Harvard. You went to Southern. I see that Graham fam hat down there, by the way. So I'm gonna move past that. Yeah. But they see my life as roses. And part of what happens when you're connecting to and relating to children is that you have to be vulnerable enough to show them the thorns. You have to be vulnerable enough to say that this was my walk. And when someone slighted me the way Principal Tiller talked about, this is what I did and what happened. And this is what I did it different and what happened better. Because you model behavior by understanding and empathizing how it could have happened to anyone, even if it didn't happen to you. And then be vulnerable enough to say that when you did bad or did not respond as well as you could, how did you get out? That human character and connection is the basis for everything. Human connection.
Virgil Tiller, the human connection, that stigma, we from the lower 9 and we don't mind dying, we from cross that canal.
CTC. Cutthroat
City. Some of our family members, some of our friends, it might have took 20 days. Some got 20 years. How long should we wait? How long does it take?
Well, it starts, the rehabilitation process starts before they get into the system. So what we are missing is that we're trying to rehabilitate them after they come out. We need to identify these kids that are having these problems earlier and give them the right services before they get to that point. Now, I'm not saying that's 100% going to work, but there needs to be more preemptive strikes with children that we know. We're saying it on this panel. They went through Katrina. They've gone through a pandemic. Some of them are raising their own brothers and sisters at home. And then if I come in as an administrator and talk to them like such and such, you have to do something. They're not trying to hear that because they're feeding their young brothers and sisters at home, just like I'm feeding my sons at home. So you have to approach it differently, but it has to be a preemptive strike. It can't be after they have done something. We have to show them before so they can make the right decision.
Shaq, I've been done a lot of men from Boys to Men back in the day. We won national awards. There are some kids we were able to make an impact on then. 20 years later, Dr. Shoulders, I see that impact now. You're involved in that immediate mentoring. Folks send them to you with Son of the Saint because they want to see something now. Do we put a time limit on a child, especially one who's dealing with ACEs and rehabilitation, Shaq?
No, I think that we're doing the exact opposite now. Like, I think over the last year, as we've increased our capacity to help, I think we've also increased our age range. You know, we now go from ages 8 to 21, and we help mentor boys through high school graduation into whatever they choose to do afterwards, whether that's into the military, collegiate, or into the workforce. We're still there hands-on, we're still there all in their business, like helping them do small things, helping them do, big things, whatever that may be is just day-to-day mentoring, because we know that because of the ACE score that this person is coming to us with, because of the work that we do, 100%. I know one of the questions was how many of the mentees that we serve had an ACE already. It's 100%, because when you lose the parent out of the home, you automatically clocked 1 point right there. So we know whenever you have that, turning 18 doesn't like eliminate that plight. So, we're helping them through that. We're helping them with mentorship, helping them do little small things like learning how to tie a tie for a job interview, which goes a long way, feeling confident going into that room, like I look my best, and I'm capable of like securing this job. So yeah, like we're actually extending that age range because of that very fact that it's a lifelong journey.
Well, Dr. Wade, it may be lifelong for some of our panelists, but for you, it's from one leak test to the next. You have to they're expecting you to get these kids ready for the best possible grades, the best possible outcomes. You have academic institutions as well as boards that you have to answer to. Talking about pressure, how much pressure is that for you to operate under those guidelines to begin to deal with these kids that Dr. Shoulders and Dr. Sonia are talking about? But you got to get them ready from one test to the next because your institution and the institutions that govern you are counting on.
Absolutely. And Mr. Thomas, if I may, I'm not only getting kids ready, I'm getting adults ready mentally. Excuse me. We have a lot of adults that's experiencing trauma, and we omit to include our teachers and administrators in these conversations as well. One of the things that I do, and I pride on at McDonald 35, we have social and emotional learning in the curriculum. And in that curriculum, we focus on leadership, self-motivation, basic values, empathy, sympathy. And I really think we need to bring social and emotional learning back to elementary level, back to nursery, so that our kids can know what it is to be empathetic, what it is to be forgiving, what it is to make positive decision-making. So holistically, I'm responsible for the entire school.
Guys, you guys can jump in on this too, because I think one of the most pressing things is how long does it take to rehabilitate someone? I mean, there's so many extenuating factors, Dr. Shoulders and Dr. Sonia. How do you put a time frame on an adolescent child, especially their development?
Oliver, I want to frame that differently.
Okay.
Because people are looking at this like, how long does this take? Like it's a math problem. If you add 2 + 2 together, you get a 4. It doesn't work like that. It's sort of like if you take the square root of 35 and intersect the area under the curve that goes around. On Wednesdays, it's going to be this way, and on Tuesdays, it's going to be another way. That's where we are. So I think the first step in this process is to frame it appropriately. Okay, we need to frame it appropriately that this is a generational trauma. Katrina babies are having COVID babies right now. Okay, let that sit on you for a minute. Secondly, we have people that are managing not just seeing murders and killings, but they're in institutions and structures that don't recognize that they're traumatized and make it worse. And on top of all of that, the things that they did to wind down and to come back from it, Mardi Gras Indian practice beating, a second lining with their crew, that's been eliminated for a year.
Right.
Okay, so all of our rituals that we use to cope were taken away from us for 12+ months. All the trauma that we've experienced, we're still percolating along with it, but stuck at home with all of our brothers and sisters and all of our parents trying to huddle around, struggle Wi-Fi to learn a little bit in virtual school.
Wow, the synergy in this panel is awesome. Dr. Sonia, Dr. Scholes on the Good Morning Show, we dedicate a segment to mental health quite often. And mental health is trending right now. You know, it's like all of those terms we use. But Dr. Scholes reminded us last time I talked to him that mental health may be trending, but the resources to deal with it aren't necessarily matching the need for the trend. Where do the resources come from, Doc?
Well, so shoot, I was preparing to answer the question about the length of.
No, do both. No, look, no, look.
But
No,
I think
no,
there is something I didn't say that is just very essential to this conversation, which I'm sure you guys have heard before, and that's just this idea that, you know, moving parts get broken. And so it really depends on what happened to the kid when, and they're not a car that's going to come into the shop. It's really, we have to do a really good assessment of what is going on with them in order to even have a plan. And then it's going to be individualized for every kid, you know, how they get better. So the question was about the resources. And so I know that, you know, as a psychiatrist, I'm a resource, and I know that I could, you know, work 40 times as much as I do, and I'd still have work to do. And so I think the resources, at least in terms of my field, that there need to be more of us. I'd like to hear from the rest of the panel about the resources that are available.
Absolutely, Rhonda, if a kid's hungry,
Yeah.
chances are that families probably doesn't have the best diet or the best nutrition. You know, so I mean, so where do resources come from?
So resources are across the board, right? Sometimes it's mental health. Sometimes it's programs like Son of a Saint that's actually interrupting what's happening with those kids and providing an outlet. And so when I look to fund programs and when I look to work with programs, I look for those that, one, have the commitment and the love there for kids, because that's important. And also, once those kids are in those programs and those opportunities, because they are opportunities. Even NORD-C, right? NORD-C offers a lot of programming throughout the year for kids that can be an interrupter. The question is, do those folks who are volunteering also have the understanding of the trauma and are they creating trauma-informed spaces, right? And so, you know, playing football is one thing, but playing football when your brother got killed 2 weeks ago is a whole different game. And so are those coaches actually prepared and on all those things? And so I think we have a lot of resources that are in the community. I think we could do a better job of actually informing and preparing those volunteers, those coaches, those folks that are working with kids to actually handle those situations in a better space. Principal Taylor and Dr. Ware, Rhonda said we've identified those resources. But one of the toughest things in the world, especially as administrators and academics, is for those resources to reach y'all. How do we make sure they get there to you all? Dr. Ware first, and then the Principal Tiller. Dr. Ware.
So for me, as a clinician, always first, I have to be mindful and cognizant of where I refer my families and my children. I have to make sure that they are empathetic. I have to make sure that they put my children first. I use agencies such as Positive Directions and Center for Hope, where I know the workers are really meaningful and in the homes doing the work that I need to be done so that I can reinforce it when they come back to me. In terms of a time frame, I don't put a time frame when the kid is developing or doing the things that we want them to do. I look at their growth is when they don't react to the things that they used to do and they're using the skills that I provide to them. So as far as resources, I collaborate with Ms. Jackson, other colleagues that I know for certain, like Children's Bureau, who specialty is working with trauma. So I am very cognizant of where I refer my kids to. We have a lot of mental health rehab agencies popping up, and I don't just refer my families anywhere.
Principal Taylor.
So as far as resources,
You need them at the school.
Yeah, I need them at the school. But throughout my education career, if you know everyone that's in education, you know that you approach resources as if you have none. So the first thing I try to do is try to find things that are free or close to being free that are impactful, like Dr. Ware stated. I need to be aware of what they are doing, and I need to be an integral part in that, because sometimes those entities can do more harm than good. So I have to be aware of that, like Dr. Ware said. And Inspire NOLA, this is the first system I've been a part of that has been giving me resources that we can actually use. The problem now that we're having right now is that, you know, with school academics being the focal point right now, it's kind of hard to fit those things in, but we have designed it so it fits into the actual school day. Doing the social emotional learning piece inside of the academic school day. Almost really every day we do that. And we track that data and we pull those scholars out. So we try to work with what you have. I mean, if we just have to scrape. So, but there are resources out there. Sometimes it costs money, and you know, right now we're kind of limited right now.
I want to segue to Shaq with that. You know, mentoring ain't free, Shaq. It's not just the funds you get with Son of a Saint, but it's the stuff that comes out of pocket, man, that you have to do. And when you talk about the Black community, for everyone here, you know, we'll identify a $5 million problem, and we'll give somebody a $50,000 grant. You know, so it's never a solution. So where do the extra resources come from when you're mentoring, especially those kids with adverse childhood experience? That's a lot of money out of the mentor's pocket, Shaq.
Yeah, I think that as Son of a Saint, we're at a privileged place of being able to offer free mental health services to all 200 of our boys, which is, I know that's not, it's not common across the board for nonprofits. So I think that we are in a good place in terms of that. And then also building in mental health programming into our activities and events. So we just completed a 5-week program called Life After Sports Mental Health Roundtable, where we just met our student athletes where they were and put them in a room with professional athletes and some collegiate athletes who had aspirations of going professional and who didn't. And it just gave them an opportunity to talk through what life could look like if you don't achieve this dream of becoming a professional athlete. Because I think so many of our young men have been kind of looked at as meal tickets for a very long time. Since the time that they could fit shoulder pads in a helmet, their families and their communities have kind of looked at them as like as meal tickets. And I think that it was great to put them into that program and to say like, this is your only option. There's other careers in sports. There's like, you have to prioritize, like Ms. Jackson was talking about of, yeah, playing football is cool, but are you also equipping coaches and trainers and all of those guys with the language that they need to talk to a kid who did just have like this traumatic experience, and you want them to perform on fights. You have to prioritize their mental health and also have to prepare them for life if this doesn't pan out the way that they've wanted to pan out for the last 12 years.
That brings me to our clinicians and our scientists as we wrap up this discussion. Guys, thank y'all. This has helped me a lot, and we commit a lot to mental health, and I've learned a lot. What's that one thing, you know, and for our scientists, Dr. Saunier, Dr. Scholas, and Dr. Ware, when you talk about adverse childhood experiences, we want to fix it, right? What's that one thing we could be doing now that's missing? Dr. Saunier.
Sorry, you're asking one thing we could be doing now to fix adverse childhood experiences? Oh, I'm not sure. But I think that we do need to dedicate more resources to juvenile justice. And I just want to point out that the main difference between Jefferson Parish and the services they have in Orleans is that they have a millage. So they have a tax that goes just to juvenile justice so that they have programming every year. We don't have that. We depend on state funding in Orleans Parish. So that would be my first vote.
Dr. Scholas.
Yeah, you know, what I want to say is that everybody can recognize that child that's committed some egregious crime or something as a child that's in need and danger. I also want to say, I want to focus on the functional ones. We got plenty of smart, brilliant kids that in spite of their circumstances are finding a way. They need attention and time too. So if I don't leave anybody listening to this panel with anything else, I want to leave them with the fact that everyone is a part of this solution. We asked about resources. Everyone listening to this panel, I'm talking to you, you're a resource. If you can't write a check, you can do something. You can be somewhere. You can talk to somebody. You can share your truth. because those are the types of resources, financial and otherwise, that really support the work that Dr. Ware is talking about, the interventions that Principal Tiller is talking about, and the outcomes that Shaq and his group really mold in a very select group of people. So again, I don't just want to focus on the real problem kids that are all the way down the hole, but also focus on the kids that are true stars, that are finding a way to shine bright in spite of everything. They need help.
And I think that's the beauty of you and I talking so much, especially about mental health on the Good Morning Show, because you were in my little brain. And that was going to be my segue to Dr. Ware. Dr. Ware, you know, sometimes it's easy to find resources for those extreme kids, right? But your job is to educate and fix everybody at your school. And you and Miss Lewis and Inspire, y'all have that responsibility for everybody. You know, how do you do that? And what is that thing that balances in terms of the resources?
Continuous network with community resources. But if I can just piggyback on the one thing that I think that's missing with our kids that's traumatic, we need to be more proactive and invest heavily in our families and the communities before the kids even get to the penal system. We need to embrace the idea of restorative practices and services in the community. And we need to get help for not only the victim, but the ones that's violating also. One of the main things that I hear in my office from my kids is that adults do not listen. I have no idea about rap music, but I sit there, I sit on the floor, I let them interpret the lyrics to me, and we process it. We have to go into their world to make a difference.
Thinking of a master plan. It's ain't nothing but sweat inside my hands, so I dig it in my pocket. All my money spent.
Oliver, some of these people on the panel weren't born when that song was made.
Walking down the street, my mind on my money down, and my money on my mind. Guys, in the last few minutes that we have, Rhonda, first of all, thank you for what you've done, not just with No Kid Hungry, but your work for years as a public servant. There's this conversation about kids being tried as adults right now. Should children be tried as adults? Yes or no?
Are children allowed to do anything else as adults? Yes or no, right? So why are they being tried as adults?
Principal Tiller. Out that lower line.
This is a close one to me because the individuals that you're speaking to, I kind of raised one. I raised one of them.
Yeah.
So they played in the band with me. I'm a professional musician, so they played music with me. It's part of turning that actual young gentleman in. So I don't know.
Okay. I understand.
I'm just being honest with you. I don't know, but I do know the pain on both sides. The pain of his father, the pain that I'm having, and the pain that the other family's having. So I don't know how to give you an answer to that.
Shaq, you're dealing with him every day. Yes or no?
I have to say no. They're just simply not fully developed. And you know, I think that's just the simplest way to put it. They're not fully developed yet.
Okay.
And, yeah, they have to have a chance to just to get a second chance.
Principal Ware?
I agree with second chances, but I think it depends on the crime.
Dr. Sonia?
Shoot, I just had what I was going to say. So I think that there's no white, bright line at the age of 18. And in terms of developmental neuroscience, it makes no sense to only be able to to stop at age 21 in the juvenile justice system. And we have a hole for young adults, which is 18 to 25. You know, you can rent a car when you're 25, not before. So that's what I'm going to say.
Dr. Maurice Scholes.
You know, I think everything needed to be said on this topic's been said. And I'm with my homegirl, Rhonda Jackson, on this one.
Guys, first of all, thank you. But I do in 20 seconds, though, Dr. Ware, do you feel like sometimes, given what you do as a scientist, as a clinician, and given in many cases the lack of resources, is it too much pressure sometimes on those that are in the school, Dr. Ware?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In terms of kids trying to stay focused, in terms of teachers trying to teach the kids, in terms of classroom management and behaviors, it is stressful. And sometimes even for me, having to be the rock of everyone is stressful for me, just hearing the dynamics and problems every day. I often ask my administrators to keep my office at a window so I can look out at the bayou. That's my means of escaping and regrouping. Absolutely.
Guys, thank y'all. This is going to close out our panel. I want to thank all of y'all for participating. Of course, Doc shows, we'll be meeting again next month on the Good Morning Show. And, guys are all invited back with the meeting WBOK to bring issues. The Inspire NOLA family, I think one of the most progressive education groups in this community dealing with these issues from social science to economics. Diane Lewis, thank you, and Inspire NOLA team. And for anyone who may have missed the discussion, you can kind of hang around Inspire NOLA's virtual panel discussion. Is going to be available at their YouTube page. Thank y'all. Have a good night. Bless you guys. I don't know where we'd be without you. Good night, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Thank y'all.